What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Grid Encore. I'm Ben Schneider. Brandon Crossland is off tonight, but filling in for him is Tanner Smith. Tanner, welcome to the Encore show. How are you doing?
Doing pretty good, Ben. Happy to be here, and it's great to be a part of Grid Encore tonight.
Yeah, it's great to finally meet you in person. I know we were talking backstage. I don't think we've been on a show together yet since you joined the team, so it's good to finally get that chance here. And Brandon, as I mentioned, is catching up on some high school basketball commitments. His district had a couple of games postponed, I think, due to weather. So unfortunately, created a schedule conflict for him tonight, but hopefully he's going to be back next week. But in the meantime, Tanner, we thank you for filling in, and we thank you all for tuning in. I see Joe's already in the chat. Happy Motor Monday. That's right. In honor of Brandon not being here, we'll toast to another Motor Monday here as we get the Encore show started. And as always, before we jump into the show with our open segment, I want to give a shout out to our Patreon investors, Colin Deschelle, Mark, Robin, David, and Matthew. Thank you so much for continuing to support what we do here, not just on the Encore show, but throughout the entire Grid Network team. And if you like what you see tonight, you can consider taking a few minutes after the program to join them on Patreon, or if you'd rather make a one-time contribution to us, you can give us a tip through YouTube Super Chat or the Buy Me a Coffee link in the description box below as well. Now, Tanner, this is a bit of an interesting situation. I'm no longer a regular on the wrap-up shows. Brandon's never been on the wrap-up show. So as we've kind of had this Encore program evolve over the last couple of years, we've started picking up some more Cup Series coverage here. I know you were on the wrap-up show yesterday, though, and there's a lot to talk about with that Cup Series finish and really all throughout the top three series with these cautions coming out in the last lap. Do we throw the caution? Do we not? I saw you on wrap-up yesterday, but I'm curious, and we'll just get started with this open segment here. Have your thoughts changed at all? I'm having 24 hours to digest what we saw yesterday when it comes to the officiating controversies that we've seen.
I will say it is important to be hearing from some of the drivers about how all of this officiating gets handled. I believe Denny Hamlin came out on social media today after his podcast, basically outlining that he agreed with NASCAR's decision to throw the caution on the final lap because, you know, we have to maintain safety at all costs. And I don't disagree with that. I hope that anything I said yesterday was not taken in a way that I don't want these drivers and the safety personnel that work at the racetracks, I don't want them to feel unsafe in any regard. That said, I still don't agree with yesterday's call. And it all boils down to, why do we throw cautions? We throw cautions to slow the field down and prevent a big mess from becoming a much larger and more dangerous mess. And while I agree if that was a caution at lap, let's say 175, we also need to consider that once the leaders cross the finish line, a caution is pretty much out anyway. Would I be correct about that? Everybody slows down on the final lap or after they cross the finish line. I just feel like comparing it to Daytona, where, yes, you're going to have, if a crash happens in turn 3 like it did last week, you have a mile and a half or so to slow down. If you compare that to Atlanta, yes, they're going to have significantly less distance and less time to slow down. But at the end of the day, the race is over. What would they be charging through the backstretch for, through a debris field? It doesn't make any sense. I just feel like when a crash happens at a pack racing style racetrack, we need to have a little bit more perspective. I feel like guys that are running in 27th that were, 3 or 4 seconds behind the pack because they have so much crash damage. I'm thinking of someone like Eric Jones, for instance, who was multiple laps down. Why would he be screaming through the debris field? And he didn't. So it doesn't really make sense from a common sense perspective why you would throw the caution, because by the time a caution is triggered by anybody in race control, you are obviously hoping that everybody's already slowing down because there's cars scattered around in front of them. Everybody is within 3 seconds of each other because a restart just happened, and they're all screaming through anyway. you're not going to get them to slow down because we don't have any sort of a limiter on the car that once a yellow is triggered, it just automatically shuts the engine down to a certain miles per hour delta and keeps them there. So it doesn't really make sense to me to throw the yellow there because it's not going to prevent anything else that's going to happen, at least in my view. So I would love to hear what you have to say. I know that what I have to say may not agree with what the drivers have to say, and frankly, I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah, well, I think they certainly have a very different perspective as the ones actually driving the cars than you and I would have here. Good to see one of our regulars, Amber, in the chat, matching yellow shirt. Ending on the caution. We didn't plan that. This is the Wings shirt that I've got on right now, the National Lacrosse League team. But yeah, that was just kind of a coincidence, I guess. But it is certainly a major talking point, and I think it's really unfortunate. I mean, it's unfortunate anytime officiating comes up in a sporting discussion because you want to be talking about the performance of the athletes or the drivers or whatever, or the quality of the racing or sporting event that you're watching. But I think it's particularly a shame this weekend because in light of what we've seen the last couple of years at Daytona and Talladega, I think there's kind of a mindset right now that what we see, and we're in year 4 of this new Atlanta configuration. I think a lot of people have the mindset that what we're seeing at Atlanta right now is what we would love to see at the Daytona 500 or what we would love to see at Talladega. That's what the crown jewel of all crown jewels in our sport should look like. And we're seeing that at a mile and a half that's just been reconfigured rather than the World Center of Racing at Daytona International Speedway. And I think overall it was, at least on the Cup Series side of things, and trucks as well, to be fair, and we'll get into trucks in Xfinity obviously a little bit later on. I think it was a great race. It was just overshadowed once again by a controversial, consistently inconsistent finish. And I guess I'll repeat what I said in our team Slack chat after Kobe shared that Jeff Gluck tweet with quoting Denny Hamlin on Actions Detrimental today. And I said, the problem is, A, no one knows the standard due to be inconsistencies. B, Fox didn't show a clear replay until minutes after it happened. And C, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, Tanner, or anybody watching the chat, but from what I saw, it seemed to me that by the time they actually threw the yellow, most of the pack was already clear of the cars that had spun out. And to your point, Tanner, once they cross the line, they're going to be off the throttle anyway. It's not like they're going to be rolling, coming out of turn 2 into a debris field and, that causing a safety hazard there. So, and then there's the fact that, and again, we'll revisit this in the Truck Series segment as well, but this conversation wouldn't be necessary if we could just finish the race cleanly. If we could stop wrecking on the last lap. That's what's, I think, the most frustrating part to me is that we advertise to our viewers every week, these are the 40 best drivers in the world. And yet we so often, now more than ever, we're in more overtime finishes per year than we've ever had before. And even when we get to overtime, half the time the race ends under caution anyway, because they can't run 2 clean laps to finish the race. If these are the best drivers in the world, and yet this is the situation that we have with these overtimes and these, do you throw the caution? You wouldn't have to ask that question if we didn't have a wreck on the last lap. So, I know, excuse me, I know Carson Hocevar came under a lot of fire and criticism for some of the moves that he made in yesterday's race. Obviously, we've talked about, the Truck Series in the past, how they've kind of had that culture problem, and Hocevar certainly gained that reputation when he was in that series. But I don't know. I think that aside from the larger culture conversation that we have to have, I think, and I said this in the chat last night when you guys were on wrap up, whether you agree with it or not, I think everybody can agree on the problem above all else being that we need to have consistency in some way, shape, or form. So if you want to say they got the call right yesterday, that's fine. But then how can you look at what just happened at Daytona? How can you look at what happened the previous day in the Xfinity Series race and say that the decisions that race control are making in the tower are in any way, shape, or form consistent or can be anticipated or can be expected? I think that's the biggest problem that we have right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I mentioned it on yesterday's wrap-up show that Josh Berry had an exceptional day yesterday, and unfortunately it ended in a shower of sparks and a 25th place finish. And I just harken back to what I said. Why couldn't he have just accepted like 12th to 15th place finish because he wasn't going to get in line before the end of that race. They were just going to keep blowing his doors off on the outside. And the only reason that crash happened is because he tried to squeeze into a gap that was not big enough for a car to be in. And obviously we had all of that destruction that we saw on the final lap going down the backstretch. If some of these guys could just get it through their head that they're not going to win from 7th on the final lap and could just accept that, hey, bringing home a clean race car in 15th is better than a wrecked race car in 25th or wrecking half the field and finishing 7th, then we would have a lot better culture in the sport. But unfortunately, NASCAR's root problem of the playoff system incentivizes these kind of moves. If guys felt that they could just escape with a good points day and that was good enough, these kind of things wouldn't happen. But unfortunately, if you can have the first 6 cars wreck in front of you and finish ahead of the cars that were able to make it through the crash, then surprise, you're in the playoffs. This is exactly what happened last week. And Josh Berry was probably hoping that maybe that's me this week. And unfortunately, that was not the case. And his mistake may have ruined a potentially great finish. And now it gives us something to talk about today and for the rest of the week. But I think by that point, we're going to be pretty tired of talking about it. But I don't know. It's just like every root problem that NASCAR has can be traced back to the sanctioning body and the situations they put drivers in. And if we could just have a little bit more common sense from both the officiating committee and from the drivers, maybe these races wouldn't end the way that they've been ending.
Yeah, well, and you brought it up, and I almost interrupted you because you mentioned winning from 7th on the last lap. That's exactly what William Byron did last week. He was running in 7th, I believe, exactly when the carnage happened all around him, and he just happened to find the path through that. And again, I take nothing away from him. He's a 2-time defending Daytona 500 champion now, but I don't think you can, and I've said this on last week's show, I don't think you can look at the manner in which he's won each of those races and put it on par with, say, what Joseph Newgarden's just done at the Indy 500, winning back-to-back. I think there's a lot more hype surrounding Newgarden's 2-time defending status as a 500 winner than William Byron's in NASCAR. And again, it's not necessarily Byron's fault. He was in the right place at the right time both years, but it's the situation that we have now at Daytona. And it's like, you look at that and say, what does that say about what's supposed to be your most prestigious race of the year? And then you couple that with what we get at Atlanta the very next week. And I like what my editor-in-chief at lastcard.info, Brock Beard, had to say yesterday. They hyped up the finish for more than a week with a documentary, endless replays of last year's finish, and the entire broadcast. And of course, it ended like that. Hysterical.
Yeah, pardon my language, but they were so damn close to another great finish.
Exactly.
They had the caution.
They really were. And it's just, again, I think hysterical is a good word for it. Like, of course, it would end like this after all the controversy that we've had. And I don't know. I think Jeff Gluck similarly just tweeted something yesterday, like, I've got nothing at this point. I don't even know what to say. So.
Yep, another Elton edict ruins a great finish.
Yeah,
so
there you go. And I guess we should have seen this coming, because I know he came out and said after the Xfinity race that we made a mistake. We should have pressed the button. And then, why are we surprised that that's what we get in the Cup Series the next day?
It's funny because I saw somebody on Reddit earlier today in kind of like a post-race thread about everything that went down. And somebody said something to the effect of, isn't it funny how in both of the scenarios where they probably should have thrown a yellow, they didn't, and when they shouldn't have thrown a yellow, they did?
Yeah.
And I just think that's perfectly encapsulates what NASCAR is all about in 2025. Making all the right moves at the wrong time or making all the wrong moves at the right time. So
yeah,
buckle up. It's going to be a bumpy ride, I'm sure, for these next 34 races.
It certainly is. Let's catch up on the chat here a little bit. And we're bringing up, we got Coda next week. Hopefully, no caution. I heard you on wrap up again though yesterday, Tanner, bringing up, we've got the new layout and what's that going to do for these drivers here. If we get a late race caution, I don't know. I think we could be setting ourselves up for more controversy there. Good to see Matthew Owens in the chat behind the mic. 24 hours to digest, and I'm still not happy. I'm done with these judgment calls with a bunch of gray area. Either end the race of a scheduled distance no matter what, or don't hate me, Ben. Just make a rule to end it under green, no matter what, no matter how long it takes. And he continues, I'm just already fed up with controversial garbage to decide the winner of an event that has a finish line. Well, I'll tell you what, Matthew, I also like what you've had to say the last couple of weeks. You brought up the overtime line, which I know not too many people are very fond of in terms of their memories of that existing, that being a rule in our sport. But you've suggested converting the overtime line to a line where if we cross it on the last lap, then we finish under green no matter what happens in terms of if we get a wreck in the middle of the pack, we let the leaders at the very least race back to the start-finish line to finish the race. I don't know, Tanner, if you've heard that idea before, if you have any thoughts on that.
It's funny you mention that because I have had conversations with people where it's come up, but I wasn't sure if I've ever put it down into words. And funnily enough, I went back to my article from the last Daytona 500 in 2024, where I said NASCAR can't keep ending races like this. And I mentioned this to Joe after last week's show when we were off camera, that it would be nice if we used all of this technology we have to our disposal now to make the ending of these races a little bit more comprehensive, we'll say. I think that at a track like Daytona, Talladega, or Atlanta, where you are obviously carrying a high rate of speed and you're so clustered together that you could have a crash happen on the backstretch where one of three things does not happen, or any combination of the three. A roll cage or the catch fence is exposed or compromised in any way on any of the cars or at any point in the track. Because I think if either of those two things happens, it needs to be an auto caution. I don't care if it ruins an ending or not. That's where an actual present danger exists, where if, God forbid, a car flying in at full speed for whatever reason in 27th flies in and hits one of the wrecked cars that has a roll cage exposed, we could be dealing with a very serious situation. Or if debris gets shot into the stands because there's a hole in the catch fence because a car is flying through again in 27th for God knows what reason, yes, absolutely throw a caution there. Or if a car isn't on its wheels, obviously throw a caution. If one of those three things doesn't happen, I don't see why we don't just go to the end, or at an equivalent point on the track where there is a timing line that all the spotters know, hey, if a crash happens here, we can finish the race at this point in the track. Like if there is a crash in turn 1, we have a timing line at the exit of turn 4 that acts as a finish line. If we're going to use timing lines to go ahead and determine how cars are placed during cautions and during stage breaks, then we need to use that same technology at the end of races and use them as de facto finish lines. Like, I don't see why we can't do that. There is definitely a point on the track where if a crash happens on it, we can have an equal point on the other end of the track where the cars could race to, and we still get a thrilling conclusion to the end of the race, and we still have enough time for the cars to decelerate before they enter a debris field or, a graveyard of cars, basically. I just feel like at the end of the day, we are in 2025 with so much technology that we have on offer, and we just don't use hardly any of it to actually enhance the racing. And it's really starting to irritate me, to be honest with you.
Yeah, well, and I also agree with what you're saying about, like, of course, if we, and the two races that come to mind for me are 2020 and 2021 Daytona 500s, like Ryan Newman getting hit in the roll cage or whatever, like, of course, that's an instant caution. And the fireball that we saw in the last lap wreck for the following year, of course, you have to throw a caution if it's that serious. But, a few cars spinning out, even if the hits are, relatively hard, if it's at the back of the pack and the leader is going to have plenty of time to slow down, on the cool down lap anyway. I don't know. At some point we need to have a more defined rule in place. And as Matthew followed up with here, maybe it's a rule that varies from track to track. That wouldn't hardly be unprecedented. We have the double yellow line rule, I think is what he's referring to, special rules on super speedways for 25 plus years. In the lower series, you've got the rule that you can't lock bumpers. That's a rule exclusive to those series, exclusive to those tracks. So, it would hardly be, unprecedented to make a rule, specific to a certain track type. I don't know. I think that there has to be, I think we can all recognize that we have a problem. And I said this on last week's show, I think as well. I don't know that I have the best one size fits all solution in mind, but somebody's got to start going to the drawing board and try to figure something out before we get to, really starting this week at COTA, but particularly before we get to Talladega in several weeks here. I think that that's something that we need to really figure out.
I don't even want to get into talking about cautions at road courses. That will make me upset. The fact that we don't have local yellows in 2025 when we definitely have the ability to pull a local yellow, it's a little goofy at this point.
Yeah.
It's a tired bit.
Yeah, you want to talk about technology. The fact that it's 2025 and we still can't figure that out. And again, we're not running the full layout at COTA this year, so we'll see if, I don't know, maybe, especially when you're running a track, that long, or like back in the day when we went to Road America, a 4-mile track, like it just kills you to have a car go off into the gravel of one section of the track and you've got to shut the entire thing down because we don't have a local yellow system in place. One more comment here from Matthew, and then we'll move on here. Don't get me started on the locking bumpers rule, a ridiculous rule that apparently isn't in place for Atlanta. Why not? Couldn't tell you. I don't know. That's a question you got to take.
It's a mystery.
And Joe brings up a good point as well. Virtual safety car or slow zone should be introduced to NASCAR and IndyCar too. Yeah, Formula One's had that for a decade now. I think right when I think 2015 was really the first year I started watching F1 full time. I think that was the year that the VSC was introduced. So they've been playing with that technology for a full decade now. I don't know. Maybe there's something there, at least on road courses, that the NASCAR or IndyCar could try to look at implementing as well.
Well, it would be nice to see them try to incorporate some technology into how these races play out. At this point, it's like we keep doing things the same way and getting the same conversations and controversy. So why not just try something different at this point?
Yeah, well, it's like, and I remember this conversation coming up last month during the NFL playoffs. Like, it's 2025 and we're still using a pair of human eyes, yards away from where the football is located, looking through a pile of 15 guys trying to spot where the ball is on 4th and 1. And it's like, that's the best. How do we not have better technology than this at this point to be able to determine whether it's a first down or not? So it's not just, baseball was very slow to implement instant replays, and that's a whole nother conversation that you can get into with stick and ball sports. But it's a conversation that's come up all over the place, is trying to find the best way to take the technology, the modern day technology that we have, and use it to make our officiating a little bit better than it currently is. I think NASCAR's fallen way behind in that. All right.
Yep.
Well, enough of that. Like, again, we could be here all night, I think, talking about the controversies that we've seen here the last couple of weeks. And I think it's unfortunate because there has been some very good racing over the first two race weekends here. But, well, there you go. Matthew, very red and gold colored glasses trying to find the spot of that ball here. Hey, the Eagles won. We were saved from the wrath of the three-peats. So you can thank my Philadelphia Eagles for that. So don't worry about that.
Is it controversial to say that I don't think anybody in the AFC was going to beat that Eagles team the way they played that night?
Yeah. I don't think. Yeah, I'm still in shock here. What was 2 weeks after the fact? I cannot believe that my Eagles won as decisively as they did, and really, like I said, 40-22 does not do a very good job of telling the story. It was not even that close. So yeah, very and again, what happened in the NFC Championship the week before, putting up 55 points on a very tough Washington team, I think was very indicative of how good that team was in the postseason this year. But enough of football talk here. Let's get into what we saw this weekend in Atlanta. We'll start with the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series. And how about this? On the 45th anniversary of the Miracle on Ice, another miracle in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series in a shocking upset. Absolutely nobody saw it coming. Kyle Busch wins your NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series FR8 208 at Atlanta Motor Speedway. Tanner, what is your reaction to this incredible upset? And do you think this Kyle Busch kid has a future in the sport? I don't know. I think he might win 63 cup races one day, maybe even 2 cup championships. What do you think?
You know, he's only doing a limited schedule with Spire Motorsports this season, so we'll have to see what he's able to do at a real racetrack. But, you know, being able to drag it out with a series veteran like Stewart Friesen and take the win away like that was pretty impressive for that young gun. So we'll have to see, but enough of being facetious about it. Stewart Friesen got outclassed by one of the best that's ever done it, and that it's unfortunate because I think a lot of people would like to see someone like Friesen, who has been a truck lifer for his entire NASCAR career, obviously get into the playoffs early. He's had a rough few seasons, especially since switching over to Toyota, and it would have been nice to have seen someone of his caliber get into the postseason early so he can have a bit more of a hall pass throughout the regular season to have the flexibility to go for alternative strategies at certain racetracks to help build up a playoff point threshold that would be insurmountable come the postseason. But unfortunately, he ran into one of the best of all time. And yeah, I just felt like coming out of turn 4, there was just no way Friesen was going to win that race from the vantage point he was at. And I think the only way he could have possibly won that race is if he had just cranked a left coming out of turn 4 and turned Kyle into the infield. So it's unfortunate, but it's good to see Rowdy get back in victory lane. You don't want to see someone who has had such an illustrious career at the Cup Series, Xfinity Series, and Truck Series levels go through the slump that he's had over the past 2 seasons. And it's good to see him in good spirits and coming out on top, even if it is just a Truck Series race.
Yeah, well, and, you know, obviously we were joking at the start about, of course, Kyle's had an illustrious career, but I can't get over, you know, he's won 63 times in the Cup Series. That's his lowest total across the top 3. He's got 102 wins in Xfinity. He's got 67 now in the Truck Series. And, you know, just like you said, across all 3 series. And I don't think, certainly the Xfinity record, and I'd have to say, you know, maybe there's some truck lifer, you know, in the future that'll be as dominant as he has been in that series. But I don't think either of those records are going anywhere anytime soon with the new limitations that we have on bushwhacking. No pun intended in this case. You know, I don't think anybody's going to even come close to those records, at least anytime in the near future. But, you know, I think, you know, and you know, people were talking about this, you know, obviously in light of what happened with Kyle in the Cup Series last year. I guess it can be a good confidence boost. You know, I personally am not a fan of Cup drivers stealing wins in the lower divisions. I think for Stewart Friesen in particular, and I had to double check this stat because I couldn't believe, you know, Stewart Friesen's only got 3 career wins in the Truck Series. I would have thought he would have been approaching double digits by now with how long he's been in the Truck Series and how successful he's been in terms of top 5s and top 10s and coming close, but he hasn't won since Texas in 2022. And it would have been only his 4th win ever. I thought maybe he had a shot at it at various points on that last lap. But of course, Kyle, being the veteran that he is, you know, was able to manipulate the draft to his advantage and get him at the line. So, you know, again, not too much to say in terms of the season picture here, A, because it's still very early in the season, but B, obviously Kyle winning the race does nothing to affect the playoff grid, whereas if Stewart Friesen had won the race, he would have been locked in and not had to worry about that the remainder of the season. But of course now, second place finish, I guess you could say, is a good points day, but in this chaotic playoff era that we're living in now, you would certainly want to have a race win under your belt, not have to worry about that for the next few months. So we'll keep an eye on how Stewart does here in the coming weeks. Maybe he can use this as positive momentum for himself. But you know, Tanner, I saw a stat from a NASCAR Insights account on X/Twitter that I couldn't believe. I think Jeff Gluck even retweeted it and said, like, I would not have guessed this in a million years. This was the 16th consecutive Truck Series race that finished in regulation without needing to go into overtime. And you think about that in light of the conversation that we just had with our Cup Series drivers. How in the world, when you think back to the Phoenix debacle that we had in 2023, not being able to get that race over with, how are the truck drivers seemingly better at this than their Cup Series counterparts, supposedly the 40 best drivers in the world?
I have been thinking about this since you sent me the script, and I've been trying to formulate a cogent and great reaction to this. And I haven't been able to quite piece together why it is this way. But if I had to take a stab at it, my best guess is that since there are less laps in the race and much of these drivers are inexperienced and don't have the confidence necessary to make some of the big moves that, you know, some of the more experienced drivers are able to make, I feel like that probably plays a factor in all of it. I see up at the front Friesen, Ankrum, and to an extent Bailey Curry, Chandler Smith. Caden Honeycutt is more of a newcomer, but Ben Rhodes, Ty Majeski, Grant Enfinger, these are guys that have been in this series for almost a decade in some cases, or more than a decade in someone like Enfinger's case. These are people that have been in the truck series for so long, and they know what they can and can't do with the truck, what kind of positions they can and can't put them in that will result in an accident. And just in general, I think veteran racers are a little bit more likely to not make those moves when it's not going to be advantageous for them. And they have learned through drivers yelling at them at their hauler after the race for making a dumb move in the past. They are a little bit more self-aware in that regard. Versus like younger drivers who might be more inclined to not make a dumb move so they don't have those people coming to their hauler, et cetera, because they saw people like Carson Hocevar constantly getting yelled at as they were coming up through the ranks. Someone like Kevin Harvick, who ended up being suspended at one point in his young career because he kept getting into incidents all the time in the lower series. I think that there's something to the truck series being full of lifers that have a ton of experience. I think that plays the biggest factor. And as you can see, most of those drivers ended up towards the front at the end of this race versus many of the younger drivers who ended up either laps down or involved in accidents towards the end of the event. So I would love to hear if you have any sort of a theory on this, but that's probably where I would lean towards.
Oh. Well, I'm kind of stumped. I think I'm like you in terms of at least an initial reaction. I'd have to, think about it a little bit, but again, it's something that, that Phoenix race was less than a year and a half ago. And that's kind of, again, we talk about a culture problem with our young drivers. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just, I don't know. It leaves me kind of speechless seeing a number like that. And I guess going back and fact checking it's been a while. Obviously we got a clean finish to the championship race last year, and Ty Majeski ended up winning that one and taking the championship. But I don't know. I think of, obviously Carson Hocevar, I think, was the most notorious of those young drivers. And I think you've seen that reputation. You saw it yesterday in the Cup race, not being afraid to ruffle some feathers, which I think, is a good quality for a young driver to have, not being afraid to make an aggressive move. But there's also a fine line between that and, going a step too far and crossing that line and ultimately causing an accident. And I think we saw that far too often when he was in the Truck Series, and we're seeing it now again in Cup. But I don't know. I don't think it's a Carson Hocevar problem. I don't think, you take Hocevar out of the Truck Series and put him in Cup, and now all of a sudden, like, the two series, have had their problems, shifted here, and it's no longer a problem in trucks. It's now a problem in Cup just because of one driver. I don't think that's the case at all. I think several young drivers are far too aggressive and, make those similar mistakes. And even the veterans, it used to be, when I got into the sport, you had your Johnny Bensons and Ron Hornadays and Mike Skinners and, Jack Sprague's, Ted Musgraves of the world, and kind of like veterans that were good drivers in their own right, just never really got that cup opportunity that they were looking for. And I guess if you want to truck lifers is kind of a term that we've coined now. I think of the ones that we still have in this series, like Matt Crafton, and thinking about the controversies that he's gotten involved in the last couple of years, namely with Nick Sanchez Talladega. And Johnny Sauter having a reputation as a very aggressive driver. I think of even, some of the veterans that we have in the series, not necessarily having the cleanest reputation. And yet here we are on a 16 race streak without needing overtime to finish these truck races. And in the Cup Series, we're 2 for 2 to start the new season. You would think that those records should be reversed in many ways. But I don't know. I think that, again, it's just kind of goes back to the biggest frustration for me in the open segment we started the show with, is that if we could get these finishes in regulation, and I guess, obviously Daytona was, kind of a different situation. We ended in regulation, but we still had a wreck on the last lap, and that brought out the caution. But if we could just finish cleanly in regulation without a wreck on the last lap, then we wouldn't even need to have that conversation to begin with. And again, it's just kind of wild to me that we have a situation now where that's more likely in one of the development series than it is in the top series in NASCAR Cup. So again, I think maybe it just goes back to the fact that overtime has been a thing for so many years now, that drivers know that, okay, maybe, a caution coming out with 3 to go isn't going to end the race now. So you can be a little bit more aggressive without, losing your chance to gain a position, knowing that if a caution comes out, that's going to be it. You're not going to have enough time to get the race restarted. I don't know. And obviously this is the series that, had that first introduced overtime even before Cup and Xfinity did. So, there's another irony there. Yeah, exactly.
30 years ago.
Yeah. I don't know. It's one of those, as my co-host Brandon might say, it's one of those stats that you can put in the makes you think category that you're not really sure what to make of it, but we'll see. I don't know. Maybe we've jinxed them now. Maybe we'll get an overtime finish at the next race because of this now. But again, it is a pretty remarkable streak, all things considered, that we've been able to say that about Truck Series for, I guess, 16 races in a row now. So we'll see if that continues.
Yeah, and hats off to them. Hats off to the Truck Series field for being able to hold your marbles together long enough to get to the end under regulation. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's move on now to the Xfinity Series race. And Austin Hill, again, what more can you say about the job he's done on these drafting tracks in the Xfinity Series? Now 5 of the last 6 Atlanta races. He's won, of course, his sponsor Bennett also sponsoring the race this weekend. So a lot of pressure on him to perform every time he comes to this racetrack. But he's doing a good job so far of living up to that reputation of being one of the best drafters we have now in the Xfinity Series. So RCR now 2 for 2 to start 2025. We mentioned on last week's show that Austin Hill was going for, there's been a lot of talk in sports recently about the 3-peat. He was going for a 4-peat at Daytona. He didn't get the 4-peat, but RCR still did because Jesse Love won that race. Now Austin Hill follows that up with a win this weekend at Atlanta. So they're 2 for 2 at RCR to start 2025. So Tanner, here's my question for you. Who is more likely to end up with a Cup Series seat at RCR should one open up? We talk all the time about Austin Dillon maybe underperforming a little bit. Kyle Busch potentially not being happy at RCR, but it's a contract year for him. If one of those seats opens up, would you put Jesse Love in the Cup seat, or do you think Austin Hill's done enough at this point in his Xfinity career to warrant moving up?
If we're talking strictly from a talent perspective, which I hope we are in this conversation, I would rather have Love in the seat. And it has nothing to do necessarily with like Austin Hill's like nature as a driver. It has all to do with the fact that Austin Hill is, I believe, 30 years old. And there's nothing wrong with being 30 years old. I'm 28. I'm about to be there. But when you're talking about moving up a potential prospect that you think could transform your organization, you have to look closer at Jesse Love. The guy came through ARCA and was absolutely on a tear. He easily scooted away in several of the lower series and getting titles. He won so many races coming up, and even last year he made his statement by winning at Talladega, and he almost won the Chicago street race. People forget that, and had it not been for SVG going even lower than Jesse Love going into, I believe, turn 7 there with 3 laps to go, he might have been able to pull it off. And I think it's really important to know that Jesse Love is a very versatile driver. I've seen him have speed at a number of different facilities, whereas with Austin Hill, I feel like he is a bit of a super speedway specialist in the same way that like Justin Haley kind of was at this point in his Xfinity Series career. So I would like to see if Austin Hill were to get the call up to Cup, I would like to see him have a year this season where he's a bit more of a contender at places like Martinsville and Bristol and even Sonoma. Like, granted, last year he was up there, but it wasn't really on speed. I didn't see him be a contender the whole day. He got the benefit of a couple of good cautions there towards the end of the race. So I am fully in the Love camp as far as moving him up because he's only 21, I believe, or only 20 years old. 20. And he's got a really, really bright future ahead of him in my mind. So I think it would be a missed opportunity to, if you only have one ride, to move up Austin Hill versus a guy that you might end up losing somewhere else, which they've already lost a very significant prospect in the last couple of years, and they're still pretty bitter about it. So yeah. I don't think they'll make that same mistake twice.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, I hope Kobe's watching because I'm about to give a Charlotte sports reference here. But I'm thinking back to the Secret Base, Dorktown documentary, People You're Paying to Be in Shorts, and the start of the new Charlotte Bobcats franchise and the 2004 NBA draft, and Charlotte saying, we'd be happy to start with either Emeka Okafor or Dwight Howard, whoever the Magic don't take. And the Magic, of course, took Dwight Howard. That left the Bobcats with Okafor. And Okafor was, a great player in college, had a few years of development there. So Okafor paid more immediate dividends when he came into the NBA. But if you look at the long-term success of each of their careers, I think we can all agree Dwight Howard had a much more successful overall career, despite the fact that he came out of high school. So it took him a couple of years to get used to the NBA level. But that's kind of what I see here with the situation at RCR. And of course, the age difference between Love and Hill is even greater than that. You mentioned it, Tanner. Hill's going to be 31 in April. So he's got a lot more experience under his belt in terms of Truck Series starts and Xfinity Series starts. So if you put him in a Cup seat, I think it would pay more immediate dividends for RCR to promote Austin Hill. But if you're thinking about building your program up long term and talking about a prospect that could be, the future face of your franchise, so to speak, I'd have to agree with you. I think Jesse Love would probably make the most sense in the long run and pay more dividends down the road for potential long-term success if you gave him a seat as opposed to Austin Hill. I think Austin Hill, unfortunately, at this point, again, like you said, nothing wrong with being in your early 30s as a NASCAR driver, but he's starting to feel to me like he might be more of a Justin Allgaier, like somebody that, and again, Justin Allgaier just won a championship. There's no shame in being somebody that makes a career out of racing on Saturdays.
In front of just kind of people.
Yeah.
Some might say.
For sure. Yeah. It just kind of feels to me like that's where we're at with Austin Hill now. I kind of see him being somebody that can be, that veteran for that Xfinity Series program. And maybe, who knows, that maybe RCR brings that 33 car back out a few times a year. And I'd like to see them bring that car out for him in Atlanta, see what he could do in the Cup Series race, at Atlanta. I've been a little surprised that, they haven't done that for him yet, given that he has made a couple of starts in that car and, attempted the Daytona 500 a couple of years ago with Beard Motorsports as well. But I don't know. That's kind of where I see Austin Hill at this point. I think Jesse Love's probably, and again, Love still has a lot of learning to do and development to do. I don't know that he's necessarily at a point where I'd say, put him in a Cup car next year, even if he wins the Xfinity title. I think maybe one more year of Xfinity in 26 might be good for him before he takes that step. But if that seat opens up, if Kyle Busch, if there's a Toyota reunion on the horizon, or if there's who knows what's going to happen. I think we can all agree that last year did not go very well for him, and if you listen to his radio communication any given week, he's not necessarily doesn't sound super happy, at least on the radio, with where he's at with the RCR program at the moment. So who knows what's going to happen, if that seat's even going to open up. But if it does, I tend to think that you in the immediate, if you're asking the question for the immediate few years, maybe Austin Hill looks better on paper because of his experience, but you have to look at their age and look at the potential that Jesse Love has shown. Maybe he would make most sense long term.
Yeah, definitely. And to kind of bounce off what you said about Kyle Busch, if you were to take his radio communications and compare them to an engine, you would be concerned about how much that engine is hitting the chip. That's all I'm going to say. He's definitely not very happy nowadays.
Yeah. You heard it again this week, I think. And again, that's why
we didn't even hear it. Mike Joyce said about it. And that gave me the impression that it was so visceral that it was too good for our pure ears to hear.
Yeah. Maybe you didn't hear it if you watched my TV broadcast. I guess you only heard it if you were listening to the scanner there. But again,
did you hear his scanner?
I feel like I've heard, I don't know, somebody, I think it was the instant with Hocevar. Somebody posted the Max clip of that, and I think got a little bit of, I think it was Eric Eastep actually. Reported that, and that got some traction. So I wasn't listening to the scanner for the full race, but I definitely remember that set. There's about a minute and a half soundbite that was making the rounds. He wasn't, but again, maybe that's not fair to RCR, because I think a lot of people were on the radio not too happy with Hocevar following that race. Ryan Blaney being another one of them as well there. But again, I was listening to Brock Beard's stream yesterday, and I guess even Brock was saying, and Brock's I think even more anti Cup drivers in the lower divisions than I am. But even he was saying, if you take the solution that he's proposed in the past, like maybe we grant an exception if you didn't win a Cup race the previous year or didn't make the playoffs the previous year. Well, that would apply to Kyle Busch on both fronts. Maybe you can't be too mad at him in this particular situation for wanting to, remind himself what it feels like to park in victory lane in a NASCAR National Series race there. So again, we'll see. Maybe this will be the shot in the arm that he needs to turn things around in the Cup program.
I also think that it's important to remember that when we do bring in these Cup drivers to a lower series program, it does help elevate their profile. It does help them create better setups for their regular drivers and things of that nature. So I think it's important to remember those kinds of things and not just the end result of, Cup guy wins race. It does a lot for Spire Motorsports to have someone like Kyle Busch in their ranks, somebody that is driving their trucks and, propelling them to obviously great results. It's important to have him behind the wheel as far as, helping the inner workings of the team week to week. So, and not to mention, this is also his former team. People seem to forget that he helped build what Spire Motorsports currently has.
Yeah. And I will fully admit, I think there are plenty of pro bushwhacking arguments that have merit to them. I just happen to think that the cons outweigh those pros, but I certainly see the arguments in favor of, in moderation. I think we can all agree it's better than it used to be. It's better
now than it was.
Yeah. I tell the story all the time. The first Busch race that I watched was 2007 Las Vegas. There were 26 Cup regulars in the field that day. Like, of course, I will gladly take what we have now over. I think Brock used to call it Cup Light back in the day, because that's basically what it was. When over half the field is also racing on Sundays, you really can hardly tell any difference. But it's better than it was, that's for sure. All right.
Ready.
Well, I don't know, Ted, if you have any follow-up, I'd be glad to hear it. Otherwise, we can move towards wrapping up the show here.
Nope.
All right. Well, I know you were on the wrap-up show yesterday, so if you have another one shining moment, I'll give you the chance to do that now. But what stood out to you from the Xfinity Truck Series races this weekend?
I think I'd like to point to Carson Hocevar, and maybe this might start a bit of a dialogue between us, but I obviously do find it a little concerning how aggressive he can be from time to time and how he doesn't really know how to rein it in, so to speak. But you really got to give your hats off to a guy that can just take a car that is normally running in 20th and just be so fast with it. Like, I believe he started yesterday's race 26th, and before you could blink and before we could get to our first Arby's commercial, he was already in the top 10. And at a track where you really kind of have to pick and choose your moments and find holes that could open up at any moment and close at any moment in a place like Atlanta where that happens all the time. It was extremely impressive for me to see him make his way through the field so easily. And even when people would bury him back in the field, he'd be right back up at the front. He didn't really strike me as somebody that was really complimented by these kind of races when he was in the truck series. So it's interesting to see him evolve into somebody that can be aggressive and for 95% of the race not cause an accident. And when he does, it granted his move on Blaney was stupid, moronic, as Blaney put it. Everybody knows that you don't give a bump draft to somebody trying to enter the corner. That's pretty much plate racing 101. But at the end of the day, the kid is 21 years old. He's not really ingratiated himself in how all of this stuff works completely yet. And, that's a whole other conversation about how, elevating these youthful drivers that don't have a whole lot of experience, these kind of things are going to happen. But at the end of the day, he put himself in a position at the end of that race to win it in a Spire Motorsports car. And I would have loved to have seen, had that caution not come out, I would have loved to have seen if he had been able to come around and win that race, because it was an impressive drive with all the scars that came along with it. I don't know how he was able to squeeze his car between Larson's and Bell's the way he was able to do it, but it would have been great to have seen him be able to cap that off with an actual chance to win the race. But at the end of the day, second is the next best thing. And in a Spire Motorsports car, from what we've seen from that team over the past 5 to 6 years, it's a supremely impressive result. And I am looking forward to seeing how Spire Motorsports and Carson can both build from that going forward, as well as his teammates, because Michael McDowell obviously spent many, many, many laps down yesterday and somehow was able to get back on the lead lap. And Justin Haley was unfortunately not really heard from, but I'm really interested in seeing how Spire Motorsports and Carson build from this. And it was a supremely impressive run, even if there were some warts along the way.
Yeah, well, I totally agree with what you're saying about Hocevar from a talent perspective. I think that the talent has never been in question. It's just been a matter of knowing how to rein in the aggression a little bit, and finding that balance between not being afraid to take risks and be aggressive, but also knowing, of course, don't bump draft somebody going into the corner at Atlanta Motor Speedway. I think any veteran driver had to have known that wasn't going to end well, and that's something I think. And I'm hopeful Carson will learn as he continues to gain experience in this series. But I think, nevertheless, for driver and team, and again, it's hard to believe. I guess this is year 7 now for Spire Motorsports since they first purchased Furniture Rose Charter at the end of 2018. And, of course, they got that shock win with Justin Haley Daytona. But they've certainly come a long way in terms of what they've been able to show in terms of race pace. And you saw it again with McDowell this weekend as well. I think I saw – I don't know if he tied a NASCAR record for the most free passes. I think he had like 6 free passes.
I think he broke McMurray's record.
Yeah. Yes. That was a remarkable comeback on his part as well, to get back up to, what was it, 13th, I think you said. So, yeah, I think that team.
Not that he had to do anything in particular to get there, but
sure. Yeah.
But yes, it was impressive nonetheless. What about your shining moment?
I'll get to that in just a moment. I want to catch up on there's a chat comment that I missed here from Amber. Kyle, won for America since Canada beat us, or beat the U.S. maybe in hockey. Had to stop Stewart Friesen, of course, a proud Canadian, driving the number 52 truck there. But yeah, that was unfortunate. I really wanted that Four Nations, win in hockey over the what would be NHL All-Star break. That was an electrifying tournament nonetheless, though. So congratulations to our neighbors to the north on that one. That was thrilling to watch as a hockey fan for sure. And then Amber leaving the American flag there, and Denver Thurston going back to the discussion we were having about the Truck Series overtime record in the last 16 races. NASCAR safest drivers and NASCAR Cup drivers should maybe take notice of that. Again, it's funny, hearing that out loud, but I guess when you see the stats on the result sheet there, I mean, maybe there's some truth to that after all. And then one more answer this question here, and then I'll get into my shining moment. How many years do you give SVG to excel on ovals? Will he be a factor on ovals? Can he be a dangerous opponent in NASCAR in the future? I think you're going to see that this weekend. Coda, he'll be a threat, no doubt, but I don't know. I mean, I saw him. I think there were a couple of points yesterday's race that he was up fighting close to the lead, if not for the lead outright. So, obviously Atlanta's not typical of what you're going to see in most mile and a halves. But I still remember when I was out at Portland last year, that was the question that I asked him after he won the race, was like, which ovals in particular do you have circled on your calendar that you think you would have the best shot at performing well at? And he, I think, only half jokingly said back to me, the left-handed ones. So he has a very ambitious plan, I think, to be competitive and be successful no matter what track type we're going to. He's very serious about this move to NASCAR that he's made. So I think it's going to take still another year or two, I think. And I think you saw that with Marcus Ambrose. I wish we had been able to keep Marcus Ambrose in Cup for a couple more years, and wish he had some slightly better equipment. I still think of what Harvick said about him, that if he had with no disrespect to JTG or RPM, but if he had say a Hendrick Motorsports car, he maybe would have had double-digit wins and probably would have stayed in NASCAR a little bit longer than he did. So we know SVG has great equipment over at Trackhouse. I think I would not rule out him winning on an oval in the next couple of years, at least, for sure.
See, that's kind of where you and I diverge a little bit, because I am starting to see a lot of the signs of this being Chip Ganassi Racing Part 2 with Trackhouse. Their performance last season left a lot to be desired. Obviously, we've all categorically raked Ross Chastain over the coals since his Darlington incident and how he's not the same driver anymore. And we also have Suarez, who since 2022 has experienced a bit of a backslide in terms of success on the track, at least in the Cup Series. He's obviously, went to other nations and won in those series, which is impressive in its own right. But at the same time, I worry that SVG, as good as he showed, as good as the development he showed in the Xfinity Series last year, I remember watching the Kansas Xfinity Series race in the fall and commenting for much of the event that he clearly doesn't have this stuff figured out, so a move to Cup kind of seems a bit dodgy, but at the end of the race, he still finished 8th, which is a very respectable result in an Xfinity Series field at the time that had a lot of up-and-coming talent. And I think that he will eventually become competitive, but it all hinges on what do the next 5 years look like for Trackhouse, because obviously I think he's here for the long haul, but if last year is any indication on what Chevy's future is going to look like throughout the rest of the 2020s, I'm a little concerned. And granted, that could lead to Trackhouse maybe moving to a different manufacturer, that may be coming in a couple of years, maybe, switching an alliance to Hendrick Motorsports compared to the RCR one that they already have. They need a boost of some kind, I feel like, to truly contend for the championship as a team, because right now, as it currently stands, I'm really not that confident in their ability to compete, because you have people like Chastain on their team who has won on ovals of the traditional sort at not Nashville and Phoenix and Kansas as recently as last year, but they're not really showing race winning pace at these more traditional racetracks. And frankly, that concerns me long term.
Yeah, I don't know. I get what you're saying, but I think still, when I think back to Chip Ganassi, I thought of Ganassi as like, obviously, of course, their IndyCar program is championship caliber. I still thought their NASCAR Cup program was, while not perennial championship contenders, still capable of competing for race wins week in and week out. So I don't know. I mean, I guess it's kind of like, I don't think Trackhouse is on the level of like a Hendrick or a Gibbs or a Penske just yet, but I still think, Suarez and Chastain both went to victory lane last year at Atlanta and Kansas. So it's still, again, I think that, Chastain's going to go on a 2022 kind of championship for run and finish second in points to end the year. I think, Trackhouse still has some work to do, like you're saying, but at the same time, I wouldn't count out. I mean, again, I think, you have to give SVG another year or two, like I was saying, before he could be considered a threat on the ovals. But I think I wouldn't be surprised to see SVG go to victory lane this weekend at COTA. We'll have to wait and see.
I wouldn't either, but
I'm also anxious to see how Connor Zillage is going to do. We got him making his Cup debut as well here, so that's going to be fun to watch. So maybe that'll be a shining moment for one of us next week. We'll see how that plays out. But for my one shining moment, let's see if I can bring the Xfinity results up here. He got caught up in the last lap, incident there. But Ryan Ellis, 18th place, I don't think shows, what he was capable of. I think he was fighting for another top 5 finish there in those closing laps for Alpha Prime. So good to see him have a strong run. Unfortunate that he didn't get the result that he probably deserved there, getting caught up in that incident. But nonetheless, I think that's another team that's kind of turning the corner a little bit and continuing to improve year by year. So I want to give him a shout out. And then also in the Truck Series, Bailey Curry, another top 5 run for him. Good to see that as well. And Caden Honeycutt as well in 6th place. Some strong runs for those drivers. So again, I usually cheat here. It's not a one shining moment. I usually like to highlight a few drivers here in these series, but some strong runs all around this weekend. So good to highlight those. That's going to do it for us here on the Encore show tonight. Tanner, thank you for filling in, and thank you all for tuning in as always. And like I always say, make sure to follow us on all of our social media platforms at Grid Network TV. We're on X/Twitter, Threads, or Blue Sky, whatever microblogging platform you're using these days. Also on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitch, LinkedIn, and most importantly, right here on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to help us continue to build up this motorsports media outlet here on this channel. And like I said, if you really liked what you saw tonight, you can take a few minutes after the show to join our Patreon investors, Colin, Deshelle, Mark, Robin, David, and Matthew, in investing in the Grid Network to help us continue to expand our coverage throughout 2025 and beyond. You can also become a YouTube member through the Grid Network channel, or if you'd rather make a one-time contribution instead, you can follow the link in the description box below, as these fine folks have done to our Buy Me a Coffee page. Or if you're watching on YouTube, like I mentioned, we have the Super Chats and Super Thanks features enabled as well. Now, taking a look at our upcoming schedule on Wednesday, don't miss Grid tonight with Kobe Lambeth, Josh Birch, and Matt White. We'll have a potential IndyCar roundtable show looking at maybe Thursday. Stay tuned for further confirmation on that as the week goes on here. And then, of course, Grid Live pre-race, wrap-up, and encore to follow as we get into the upcoming weekend. So stay tuned for more coverage from the Grid Network team as always. Tanner, any final thoughts before we sign off for the evening here?
Don't think so. It was a pleasure being here, and hope everybody has a great week.
I just want to say, Tanner, you kind of mentioned it with Trackhouse and manufacturers here. There's been a lot of talk. The IndyCar season starts up at St. Pete this weekend as well. Wouldn't it be wild if you had Dodge/Ram? We're hearing those rumors with the Truck Series as well, potentially as early as next year. They could have both left and returned to NASCAR before IndyCar finds their third engine manufacturer, or before IndyCar moves away from the DW12. Wouldn't that be wild?
It would be a bit wild, but it's also, I'm just so glad that we'll finally stop hearing about a fourth manufacturer in NASCAR and having to hear Steve Phelps get on that stage and lie to us every year for 5 years, going on a sixth. At least now we'll finally have a fourth, at least it looks like, and maybe a fifth will finally be able to enter the fray.
Yeah, well, maybe not so good news for IndyCar as they continue to try to figure out who their third partner might be, but it would be great to see Dodge and Ram back in NASCAR, that's for sure. One more comment, and then we'll sign off. SVG job for this year in Trackhouse win on road and street courses? Yeah, I think absolutely.
Yes.
And you could see that, like we said, this weekend, Coda, and maybe multiple times this season, if his drive at Chicago a couple years ago was any indication. I think he certainly knows how to get the job done. So again, we'll see. Regardless of what happens at Coda this weekend, we'll have plenty of coverage on the Grid Network channel this upcoming weekend. As always, thank you all so much for tuning in, and be sure to stay tuned for that coverage next weekend. For Brandon Crossland, who's off tonight, for Tanner Smith, thank you again for filling in. I'm Ben Schneider. We'll see you next time. Have a great rest of your week, everybody.